book specifically ending it with saying, some truths can only be told in fiction.
Recently I was reading an article in Germany recently, a couple of technicians that were installing a robotic arm. One of the technicians was killed because the robotic arm literally picked him up and slammed him up against the wall. These are the types of military concepts that are being out there, and exoskeleton technologies that are being integrated with human beings. People who need to really stop and think, who do you trust with that type of power? And I think we've said this before, with great power comes great responsibility. And who out there do you trust with having the responsibility to do what's in your best interest? It's something to think about.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wouldn't just limit it to being in your best interest. It's probably more about what's in the best interests of your children and your children's children.
That's definitely where what we're leading to. Where does it all end? Eventually, if this continues, as Lars has mentioned, at somewhere in point, the mass culling has to happen. Somewhere in point, if this continues on this path,
Mm-hmm.
the weeding out of those that they do not wish to continue has to happen. And who are you going to allow to make that point? So this is a topic that I think everyone needs to jump on fast, and something that needs to be disseminated amongst the populations, not only here but around the world. And it is our only chance. And again, the one race that we should be fighting for is the human race and the right of choice. Lars, it's so nice to have you back and on our show as a guest. And I know a lot of listeners are curious and would like to know what have you been up to the last 6 months?
So it's nice to be back here, even though I'm not a host, but just a guest.
Yes.
And there's a reason for that. And the reason is that I've decided to leave the TI community and icaact for a while and go off the grid, basically. But but just to speak a little bit, I want to speak a little bit about what I've done for the last 6 months, where I've been on leave, basically been off the TI community as well. I tried to run for public office, as you said, Jesse, but unfortunately, I didn't read the fine print in how to collect signatures and so on. So that basically screwed up my possibility to run. So that was entirely my mistake. And I wasted a lot of time, of course. And this is very unfortunate. And even more unfortunate is the political situation we've ended up in Denmark. And to describe it, basically, we have ended up with a extreme right-wing government in Denmark. And I can best describe it as being proto-fascist, as it completely relies on the mandates of the Danish People Party, which is a nationalist socialist party. And it really frightens me. One of the most prominent leaders of this party has openly proposed and advocates that the Danish government should engage in theft by using our intelligence community for industrial espionage. This was not given behind closed doors, but in an open session in Parliament, which would make the entire population of Danes label us as a band of criminals. The same party also wants to collect fingerprints and DNA from all citizens. They want to treat the entire populations as if they were criminals, and they want to expand the domestic surveillance systems. And essentially, this party is everything that I'm not. The party also rejects to recognize and abide by international laws and treaties. They openly declare that they would like to abolish the UN and EU Human Rights Declaration. And in Denmark, we have a saying that is, A thief with a criminal mindset believes that everybody else is a thief and a criminal too. So our government is now totally dependent on people who don't even try to hide that they are driven by criminal mindsets. And just to prove this point, how dependent the government is on this, is that the new government's first act was to abolish the Danish War Crimes Commission that was established to look into the legalities of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars and the Danish conduct in those wars. They closed it down just as they were about to call the former Prime Minister and former NATO General Secretary Anders Fogh Rasmussen to give testimony. And it's really, really blatantly in our face why they want to close that down. They are really afraid of what this commission is going to reveal. And a few facts have already leaked from this investigation. The first leak was that Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the former prime minister, appeared to have promised the US to join the war a year in advance of the war. And the second, and that's the Iraqi war, by the way, long before anything was decided, apparently, the Danish prime minister promised to join the US war efforts. And the second leak was about the military secret partnership with the mercenary company Blackwater. And the former government tried to hide this not only from the public but also from parliament. So it's not only the Danish security and intelligence service, but also the Danish military that had a very close working relationship with mercenary companies and so on. So that just gives an indication of what this War Crimes Commission was going to reveal. But we are not going to get a full investigation, at least not at this point, before we hopefully get another government in 4 years or something like that. And these political developments are also part of why I decide to step back and go off the grid, at least as long as this government is in place.
Yeah. Now, the interesting thing, Lars, is you also said something that potential targets and why you want to be off the grid. Some of those targets were worldwide peace organizations. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's no longer a secret that human rights groups and human rights activists have been targeted by international intelligence communities. And it has been admitted that both the UN's Children's Funds and Amnesty International and a lot of other human rights groups have been targeted by the intelligence community. And we, of course, also know that we have been surveilled. We're pretty certain of that. And I find that frightening that this has become sort of the norm, that everybody who is just fighting for human rights and trying to do this kind of work is considered a threat to nation states and alliances. And this in itself is just unbelievable to me.
Yeah, and it really is sad, and it doesn't look like it's only happening in Denmark. We are now seeing almost a cookie cutter trend across the globe of these types of stories, Lars, and you have been, really a crusader for bringing the truth out. And then some of these topics are not easy to swallow or to face, and you have been brave enough to just really bring it out there and put it in the community spaces and put it out where it needs to be. We thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think there's also another thing that really concerns me. I've actually spent the last couple of years also to study some journalism and take some courses in journalism and communication at the Danish School of Media and Journalism. And I was shocked to find out very recently that officially now the Department of Defense Law of War Manual declares that journalists can be considered enemy combatants. And that basically means we no longer have a free press. And as the so-called war on terror is not restricted to a few countries but global, the battlefield is the entire world, and that means that journalists can no longer feel safe anywhere in the world. And even if, when we take just as Denmark as an example, in Denmark, the Danish government has for years refused to tell its citizens whether we are at war or not. They simply refuse to tell that, and basically we know what that means. We are probably in a state of war legally, in a legal sense, and that would also mean that any journalist who oppose the government could be considered an enemy combatant, and
And
that is scary in itself. So I think these are all things that I think I just need to lay back for a while.
yeah, and it seems like it's an easy way to basically censor free speech and freedom altogether, and label you as a terrorist, and it just is unbelievable where we've come, and it really, the sheep will need to wake up.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, Lars, as always, you're always a plethora of information, and you really have your pulse on your finger on the pulse of what is happening in the globe around the world, not only in Denmark, but you have done a wonderful job in bringing forth the truth, so that people wake up and people see things as they truly should be seen. And it really, this new global movement against freedoms needs to turn into a global movement where humanity is itself, a global movement for human beings, comes together and really tackles some really hardcore questions, and really stand up and fight for what is right, and fight for the freedom to choose to be human, and the freedom to choose uh, to not be oppressed, the freedom to not be enslaved, the freedom to not just be a nobody. And Lars, any closing words?
Yeah, actually, I want to close the show with an old poem, and it's by a former German U-boat commander. It's a very famous poem, but it's still a very powerful one. And it's written by a pastor, Martin Niemöller. He was basically a dissident. He was first in the First World War. He was a U-boat commander for the German fleet, and during the Second World War, he was a dissident, sort of opposing the Nazis during their regime. And for that, he was imprisoned and put into the concentration camps of both Sachsenhausen, and spent many years in the Dachau concentration camp for just speaking out against the Nazis. And he wrote this poem. And I think it's just as good today as it was back then. And it basically tells exactly where we're at this point in history. And it's called First We Came, First They Came. First they came for the communist, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialist. I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. And I think essentially, if we want to update this poem to the present time, it should basically read something like that. Something like this. First, they came for the dissidents, and I did not speak out because I was not a dissident. Then they came for the Muslims, and I did not speak out because I'm not a Muslim. Then they came for the human rights advocates, and I did not speak out because I'm not a human rights advocate. Then they came for the journalists, and I did not speak out because I'm not a journalist. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me.
Wow, that says it all. Until next time, folks, I'm Jesse Beltran, and thank you so much, Lars. Hope we will hear from you soon, and we wish you well on your endeavors, and we will definitely keep in touch. Until next time.
A child born today will grow up with no conception of privacy at all. they'll never know what it means to have a private moment to themselves, an unrecorded, unanalyzed thought. And that's a problem, because privacy matters. Privacy is what allows us to